And welcome to the Laney Photography Department's video on the assignment that we call the ISO bracket. Under normal circumstances, we would be standing at your elbow and we could walk you through this assignment. We can't do that due to COVID. So we're going to do a video here that will describe what it is that we do. We're going to take a look at this. We're going to look it over the next couple of days, and then in our next class session we'll talk about it again, and it will be our assignment. This will give you a head start. First, you set the mode dial to M. You can see right here, here's the M, because we're going to be shooting in manual settings. Now this is our challenge. We are slowly, in the next 3 weeks, going to be moving into a full manual operation. And this is really the exciting thing. This is what's going to separate you from other photographers or picture takers. Let's start by setting our aperture at f8. And you will notice here that I'm pressing the AV button, and with this finger I'm moving the command wheel to F8. See these arrows? That means I'm working on aperture. I take my finger off and I can keep that value. We will be shooting in low light and full light. For low light, we want to set our ISO at 800. As you may recall, by pressing the ISO cross key, we get this little tableau, and we can bang through these by pressing this key or this key back and forth to get to the one that we want. And by pressing the set button, we're telling the camera that's the one that we want to keep. We want to keep ISO 800, and once you take your finger off, you can see, ta-da, we have kept F8 and ISO 800. Now this is the challenging part for us, because now we're going to have to use our manual settings to try and find an exposure. And what you need to do is you need to take some pictures and you need to look at your LCD to see if they're any good. Plain and simple, that's how it works. So we're going to start, let's say, at 3/100ths of a second. We're going to go to 1/6 of a second. We're going to go to 1/10 of a second. We're going to go through 1/13th of a second, a 15th, and a 20th of a second. And what we want to do is we want to go through here and pick what we think is the best one. I think that's probably it. So we're going to choose our very best shot, and then we're going to take two other shots. We're going to shoot at ISO 1600 and ISO 400 as well. To start, let's just go back to, we'll do an exposure at ISO 800, 1/13th of a second at f8. Your values may be different. This is just to illustrate. The next shot we're going to do, we are going to change the ISO. We're not going to change the shutter speed. We're not going to change the aperture. We're just going to change the ISO to 1600. It amplifies that signal, and you can see how much brighter it gets. Then we're going to go to ISO 400. Same old shutter speed, same aperture. We are going to reduce the amplification, and you can see that it's darker. Here's our hero. There's over amplified, there's under amplified. The point is that these different ISOs give you different brightness values. So for full light, we're going to go to an ISO of 200. Pressing our ISO button, scrolling through here, pressing our set button in the very center, we're able to keep ISO 200. And then we're going to run through a sample of shutter speeds, just as we did before. And it's kind of trial and error, you guys. You got to find something close. You got to look at your LCDs and see what you think is getting close and start working through your shutter speeds there. If things are coming out too light, then you want to speed up your shutter. Here's 1 second. Here's 0.03 of a second. Here is 1/6 of a second. Here is 1/13th of a second. Here is 1/20th of a second. And these are all at ISO 200. Notice this is a much more full light. It's a hard direct light. Lots and lots and lots of light. So what we want to do is we want to try and decide what our favorite exposure is. Again, we're going to go right here at ISO 200 at 1/13 of a second at f8. We kind of like that. We think that that's a good one. Now what we want to do is we want to do a bracket. And what we're going to do is we are going to shoot at ISO 100 and ISO 400. Now, get in the habit of doing this. Do your hero first, then do another one at ISO 400. You can see the amplification there. ISO 100, less amplification there. The point is that at a certain ISO, you can get a good exposure. If you change your ISO to more amplification, things can get brighter. If you change your ISO to less amplification, things can get darker. So let's look at the finals. This is our result. This was our sweetheart, and in full light, we essentially underexposed it. We underamplified it at ISO 100. We overexposed it. We overamplified it at ISO 400. You can see the difference here. Next, let's take a look at the low light. Now, here's our hero. And you can see ISO 800 at 1/13 of a second. Now, if we overamplify it to ISO 1600, it gets bright. Underamplify it at ISO 400, it gets dark. This illustrates the power of ISO amplification. More amplification, less amplification. It works very similarly to more light and less light in shutter speeds, more light and less light in apertures. But this will be the foundation for our exposure. So I want you to take a look at this. I want you to spend some time with it. And if you come up with questions, you know where to reach me. Thank you for your kind attention.